Thank you everyone for coming tonight. And I hope you guys are going to enjoy this very informative talk that Heather is going to give us about human trafficking. It's something that's very often overlooked in our area, but shouldn't be, considering we're at the crossroads of I-80 and 39. It is a hotbed for human trafficking, among other trafficking, but this is a big deal. Um, Heather works with Safe Journeys, which is our local domestic and sexual violence organization. They work in LaSalle County and Livingston County. Definitely never hesitate to reach out to them if you are a victim of domestic violence or sexual violence. They have a ton of resources. It's all anonymous if you'd like it to be. They will help you with anything you need. You can contact Heather. You can visit their website. There's all kinds of resources if you need anything. If you need help getting in contact with them, you can reach out to me also. I'll be happy to help you get into contact with them if it's necessary. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Heather.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming. Like Emily was saying, I am from Safe Journeys, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys here real quick. All right. Okay, there we go. So I'm from Safe Journeys, and we are the sexual violence and domestic violence agency here in LaSalle County as well as Livingston. If you need any services and you happen to be in Bureau County, Freedom House is kind of like our sister agency, if you will. So we do provide a variety of services that I just wanted to go through with you guys. We provide counseling to victims of domestic or sexual violence, and that includes children. We have a child counselor specifically. We also can provide counseling for support persons within the life of the victim, because we know that everyone around victims are affected by either type of violence. We also respond to the hospital if they call us and say that they have someone there who's been sexually assaulted. And we do some legal advocacy for our victims as well. We have a hotline that I'll share at the end with you guys that you can call 24/7. It's confidential. All of our services are free. And anyone in Livingston and LaSalle County who are affected by domestic or sexual violence can use our services. We also do have shelter for those who are in need. So on the agenda today, we're just kind of going to talk a little bit about what human trafficking is, where it takes place, the model of human trafficking. We'll talk about ways to identify possible trafficking situations and what to do in those situations, as well as some final action steps to help to end human trafficking. So I want to invite you to take a second and just think about these words: prostitutes. Who are prostitutes? Why are they prostitutes? What's brought them to this place? If you want, you're welcome to type some of your thoughts in the chat, but it's by no means necessary. And then, in addition to the prostitutes, what do you think human trafficking is, and who it happens to, and where it might happen? Because at the end of this presentation, I'm going to open up a little space for you to sort of reflect on the presentation and maybe talk a little bit about how your thoughts may or may not have changed. And forgive me, I do have notes, so you might see me flipping my paper a little bit here today. All right. So the definition of human trafficking, the big part in this definition, hence the underline being bold, is the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And that's going to be used in order to control another person for the purpose of either engaging in sex acts, which would be sex trafficking, or soliciting labor services, which would be labor trafficking, against their will. Any child, so anyone under the age of 18, who is engaged in commercial sex, meaning selling sex, is considered a victim of trafficking, even if there is no force, fraud, or coercion. And I put this note about not the same as smuggling because a lot of media has kind of gotten smuggling and human trafficking all smushed together, and they're not the same. Smuggling is moving people or substances across borders illegally. Now, smuggling may be a part of someone's trafficking story, but they do not have to be moved across borders illegally from different countries or states or counties or anything like that to be considered a victim of trafficking. So you probably, if you've done any research or looked at anything else online about human trafficking, you've probably seen modern day slavery. And I like and dislike that term. I like it because it is slavery, because you're profiting off of someone else's work. And then they are, stuck doing this. They have difficulty getting out of it. But I don't like the slavery aspect because it puts these images of like people in chains. And that's not really how it is. It's all mental, and there can be physical violence, but they're very rarely like chained or trapped. And although kidnapping does happen, it's not as common as the media would lead us to believe. So any sort of exploitation for labor or sex work is considered human trafficking, especially the forced fraud or coercion. And there's two main categories. There are a gajillion little branches of these, but the main ones are sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Sometimes you will see that they're actually a combination of both within a single person's individual story. So labor trafficking is using force, fraud, or coercion to recruit, harbor, transport, obtain, or employ a person for labor services. This one, you'll hear people using involuntary servitude as a term, debt bondage, meaning the victim owes the trafficker money and they're working it off, or just generally slavery. There are two great PBS frontline documentaries that I think really illuminate what trafficking in the United States looks like. They have one called Trafficked in America, and that's some young folks from Guatemala who have been trafficked and are working they're working with some agriculture, chickens, I believe it was. And then there's another one that's for sex trafficking, and I'll have that up on the next slide. But I've got a few different types of common labor trafficking situations here. Domestic work, which can either be in someone's home individually, like they have hired this person to live there or hired this person to live there. Or a lot of times it's in like hotels, resorts. Construction work and agriculture are huge for labor trafficking. I have not done the amount of research on labor trafficking that I have on sex trafficking. I suspect we do have some agricultural labor trafficking going on in our region. And then you can see some other ones: fishing, not a huge one for us, but in the rest of the United States, catering. When you see those people selling, like I always think of in Washington, D.C., they have people selling fake Oakley sunglasses on the street. That would be the kind of street trading they're talking about. Garment work, which would be like the factories that some of the young kids are stuck in, and then mining as well. And there are a whole bunch of other ones, but we're not going to get into those today. We're going to focus mainly on sex trafficking. Again, there's that PBS Frontline documentary, this one specifically about sex trafficking. Highly, highly recommend. It really follows the whole story of this particular victim. So again, force, fraud, or coercion. You'll see the term commercial sex act a lot when you look at these definitions. And all that is it's some sort of sexual performance, whether it actually be intercourse or perhaps it's webcam where the girls will screen or do things on camera for someone to watch. And that's going to be in exchange for something like money. It could be drugs, it could be food, it could be shelter. I've got some examples down here. Prostitution in and of itself, if there is someone controlling them, that would be sex trafficking. The fancy term for webcam or cam girls is remote interactive sex acts. I'm going to refer to them as cam girls. And if you're not familiar with what cam girls are, is they set up some sort of webcam and they will either stream sex acts on the webcam to a large group of people, or sometimes they will have an individual like video type call where they might perform sex acts on demand. Pornography, like porn stars, sure, maybe the big ones aren't being trafficked, but they're definitely being exploited. But there is a lot of trafficking victims within pornography. Escort services, illicit massage parlors, or brothels, of course. Illicit just means illegal. So where is this taking place? Well, a lot of places, unfortunately. There are some big ones, and particularly here in the United States, we see a lot of motel hotel work. Usually dates will be set up online through an escort service, they'll say. I think I saw one that was providing comfort, and then really it's just a sex service. So they'll set up some sort of date, usually online, sometimes through like text messaging or phone calls, but mostly through some sort of website or platform. OnlyFans, I have a picture up there. OnlyFans is a platform that they use. I want to stress, though, that not everyone on OnlyFans is being trafficked. Some sex work is done by the individual and the individual profits. It's actually on the less common side. Most sex work is survival sex, meaning they're just trying to get shelter or food or something like that, or they're being trafficked. We see strip clubs. Now, the actual strip club part isn't sex trafficking, but a lot of times the dancers will then be eliciting sex from some of the patrons at the strip club, with a trafficker taking their money. Any illegal bar or cantina, that thing, we see them there. Massage practices are very common. In fact, we have one that I know of off the top of my head in our area. If you see a massage parlor that looks a little run down, they don't have a lot of windows, they don't have a big sign, and the big one that is like, okay, this is sex trafficking, they are open at like 2 a.m. No massage therapist is going to be giving a massage at 2 a.m. That is definitely a sex trafficking situation. And then also in homes or brothels are essentially just a business with a variety of prostitutes or people being trafficked where they would work in one location. Not as common, though. Massage and motel are the big ones. So human trafficking in the internet. Thanks to the internet, human trafficking has been exploding. The internet has provided an extremely lucrative place for one, recruitment of victims. They'll place ads on a variety of different platforms. They will target people through different gaming platforms like Discord, and they will use social media, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, you name it. A lot of times they'll say, oh, we've got a great modeling job for you, or an acting job, things like that. They can also then market these individuals to the Johns. Johns are people purchasing the sex acts via websites and social media. And then the actual exploitation is also now, like I mentioned, the cam girls, taking place online, which is amazing for the traffickers because they don't need to transport their victims and they don't have to have patrons coming to them. So they're now able to make more money for less work. All right. I wanted to mention a few more of the websites before I just looked at my notes again and forgot I wanted to mention them. So I talked about OnlyFans. There was one called Backpage. Backpage has been taken down because of all the trafficking. They started to consider doing that with OnlyFans and people freaked out. So OnlyFans has not been shut down or has not taken away that particular sex trafficking aspect down. There's other ones called Skip the Games, Rub Hub, which is where you would find the illicit massage parlors, Facebook, of course, Craigslist, not so much anymore, but originally. And then there's another one called Mega Personals. So the next slide here is who's doing this trafficking. So anyone, honestly, can be a trafficker. We see a lot of traffickers are mainly adult males. However, there are enough stories of people being trafficked by schoolmates or family members. And a lot of organized crime like gang activity will also traffic women. There are specific people that they call brokers who help coordinate child workforces. This is less for sex trafficking. This is more for labor trafficking, but it does happen in rural areas. You'll actually see that in one of those PBS documentaries, the labor trafficking one. And then you'll also see in that particular documentary, the multinational organizations that actually have some licensing and can help provide visas to get people in. They kind of have this guise of bringing people in these normal or healthy circumstances, but that's not how they end up operating once they're in the United States. There's 4 major stages for a trafficker to traffic a victim. And we're going to talk about each of them a little bit today. This is what I call the trafficking model. So the first stage would be luring or recruiting the victim. And then the second stage is what they would either call grooming or seasoning. Seasoning is more of a term that you would hear from the actual traffickers themselves. You don't see it so much in like academic literature. That's where you would see grooming. And then there's the coercion and manipulation stage. And then that final stage is full exploitation, where they're actually putting the victims out there to make money and to get money in exchange for some sex act. So the recruitment and the luring stage. So the very first thing that a trafficker is going to do is he is going to look for a vulnerable population. Vulnerable populations can include homeless or runaway individuals. They may include individuals that are addicted to substances. Someone who does not, economic insecurity, they don't have a job, maybe they don't have housing. Anything that's going to make someone a vulnerable individual, they're going to use to their advantage. So they look for these vulnerable people. Once they identify a vulnerable person, they get to know them under the guise of, maybe I'll be your manager and we'll get you an acting job, or a friend, or oftentimes it's a relationship interest. So that's like they're coming in as if they have a romantic interest in this individual. They do not. So once they're trying to get to know them, they ask a lot of questions and they identify specific needs and wants of that victim that nobody else is filling. So that might be, say, it's a young person who ran away from home because they have an unstable family life. So they find out that this young person wants, a parent figure. They want someone who's going to love them unconditionally, support them financially as well as emotionally. So they find out what void can they fill in this person's life. So they identify that and then they gain their trust. They say things like, I want to take care of you. I will never leave you. I love you. I want to get married. Let's have kids, these kinds of things. They make all sorts of promises they never plan to fulfill. And a lot of them are easy money promises or relationship promises. All right. So, like I mentioned, they traffic vulnerable people. And this is particularly the thing that irks me. I mean, all of it is terrible, but they are looking for people who are in need so that they can exploit them. It's a lot easier to manipulate, threaten, coerce a person who has a vulnerability. If they're offering stability and access to resources, why wouldn't someone be willing to trust that individual? I had mentioned a few of these targeted groups before. I had not mentioned the foster care. It is not a huge, there's not a huge number of individuals from foster care and trafficking, but there's enough. They also look to people who are trying to immigrate. So if they are coming from another country, like say Latin America, they're like, oh yeah, we can help get you in. Anybody living in poverty, any sort of oppressed or marginalized group of people, people of color, LGBTQIA, anybody who's historically been abused, whether it be domestic sexual violence, physical violence. Once a person has been subject to abuse or has been victimized, they are at much higher risk of being victimized again. And also, I had forgotten juveniles or young people who recently got out of juvenile detention. All right. So grooming or seasoning. Again, seasoning less often used in the academic and legal aspects, but you will hear it from out of traffickers' mouths. This is pretty much brainwashing. They will start to expose them to little things that might be precursors to sex work. So maybe it's just showing them some pornography. Maybe it's getting them to do sex acts they didn't seem super comfortable with. Oh gosh, they'll start to ask them to have sex with friends or things of that nature. There's so much manipulation. These traffickers are amazing manipulators, masters of manipulation, honestly. They continuously reinforce the idea that the victim depends on that trafficker, that the victim can't survive without the trafficker. They create this environment of dependence by providing whatever necessities they need. And they're constantly telling them things like, without me, you wouldn't survive. Or without me, you would never have access to these drugs or this other necessity. They also begin to isolate the victim from any possible systems of support, any friends, any family. They will often encourage them to leave school if they're in school. They monitor them so closely. Traffickers monitor the victims so closely. They know who they're texting, who they're talking to, where they're going, and they systematically remove those support systems. So mostly it's don't text this person, or if you do see this person, we're not going to give you this, or I'm not going to be your boyfriend, stuff like that. And then they often, if the person's not already addicted to some sort of substance, they will introduce a substance, because a person who is addicted physically to a substance is going to be much more likely to come back if the substance is being provided for them. A lot of this grooming starts online, at least with young folks, and then moves into in-person. So they will start sharing like I'm going to be the one who takes care of you kind of situation online. Not always, but it does happen. And then this coercion and manipulation part, they're more manipulation from before. It's even like heavier. For a person who might be watching, say like fly on the wall kind of situation, you'd be going, oh my gosh, this is wild. I can't believe someone is able to manipulate another human this way. There's a lot of blackmail. They will often hold, quotes, ID documents. So things like passports, state IDs, driver's license, social security card, birth certificates, because it's a lot harder to leave and establish a new life when you don't have your identification documents. They do everything they can to reduce the victim's freedom. Most of these individuals do not drive. They have no access to a vehicle, and that is on purpose. They need to be driven anywhere they want to go by the trafficker or someone who works for the trafficker. Again, I had mentioned a little bit the introducing to things like pornography or unfamiliar or uncomfortable sex acts. And then they move into things like, well, let's make a movie, have sex with my friend. I know in one of the PBS documentaries, one of the first things that
Jennifer's kids all in school.
One of the first things that happens
Now,
is
who's
a
taking
young
care
girl.
of Olivia that she has to be home?
I'm sorry, somebody needs to mute their mic. I'm sorry. No big deal. Happens to all of us. But we start to get coerced into these smaller sex acts. And usually physical violence doesn't come in at this point. There may be threats or some volatility with the trafficker where the victim starts feeling like maybe their physical safety is in jeopardy, but it's not like overt violence at this stage. Then comes the final stage, which is full exploitation. And this is where they're going to be performing sex acts for money or labor for money. They are never paid well. Even say an escort service, say some woman shows up to the hotel to have sex with a man that he solicited a date online, and he gives her $1,000. She takes that money and immediately goes to the trafficker. Does she see any of it? Probably not. Maybe she gets like $5. Usually the traffickers are going to be providing the victims everything that they need, or so they say. So like they'll get their phone. They're not paying bills. They're getting, their nails done. The trafficker's paying for that. The trafficker's giving them food, that sort of stuff. So they don't have cash, and they don't necessarily have a need for cash unless they're trying to leave the situation. Of course, these are risky and unhealthy working conditions. I would listen to a podcast recently from I think she's a prosecutor now in Cook County. And she said there's no such thing as a happy hooker. And I could not agree more. If there are girls on the street around here, it's freezing, right? In the middle of winter, or it's blazing hot and humid in the summer. Not great working conditions. They may be operating out of rundown buildings that, maybe there's sewage leakage or radon or asbestos, all kinds of things. Not to mention the physical violence that they could incur at the hands of a buyer. Lots and lots of prostitutes are raped, and it drives me bonkers when people say prostitutes can't be raped. They absolutely can be raped. If the prostitute says, no, I'm not going to have sex with you, even if they had originally said they were going to, and that man forces her or that woman forces him, it becomes rape. Not to mention, of course, STIs, right? HIV is a big one, syphilis, and then the other like gonorrhea, chlamydia, and so on. They often will have recurring urinary tract infections or other sorts of reproductive problems. Not to mention, they tend to be malnourished for the most part. In this full exploitation, you kind of have a Stockholm syndrome situation. The victim identifies with the trafficker and the trafficker is their provider. They don't think they can survive. They don't think they have an opportunity to leave. This is just how it is, and they have to deal with it. Some victims will even start working or recruiting for the trafficker. So they may end up being sort of like a middle management, if you will, in the trafficking model, because then they do get a little bit more power and a little bit more leniency. And they might even go out and recruit other individuals to be part of this trafficking ring. It's really important to mention that victims don't see themselves as a victim because of all the manipulation. If you just randomly, were to come up to someone and be like, you're being sex trafficked, the person would very likely be like, nah, that's not true. I'm making money or I'm working hard or whatever the case. They rarely see themselves as a trafficking victim until they're out of the situation because of the Stockholm syndrome type mentality. A lot of the girls will say, well, it's my fault. I was addicted to drugs. And if I wasn't addicted to drugs, then I wouldn't be in the situation. Or if I didn't let him do this thing, I would be okay. The manipulation is so outrageous that like these women don't even feel, and I'm saying women because it's mostly women, but it's not all women. They don't feel like they have any choice at all. They have been broken down and built back up by the trafficker to fit exactly what the trafficker wants them to be. All right. Why don't they just leave? So they really don't believe they have a choice. I know I've said that already, but I cannot bring that point up enough. They have been brainwashed. They don't think they can survive. Maybe they're like, ooh, I want to get out. Well, if they have even the slightest inkling and the trafficker realizes that, he is going to go into full threats, physical violence, blackmail. He may threaten any like children. There's one story. I'm not going to tell a lot of stories because they're not my stories, so I don't like to do that. But there was a one story of a young woman whose trafficker would not feed their child, the child they had together. He would not feed their child if the woman didn't meet a certain quota. So if she came home and only made $700 and her quota was $1,000, their child didn't eat that night. And this is the kind of stuff that traffickers do. This is not an outrageous story. This is very common. Of course, there's other various threats of harm or taking away certain things. They like to create this sort of fake scenario of what they call, or what we call, debt bondage. And that's often like, well, we're providing these opportunities for you. We're providing you with food. We're providing you with a house. I'm paying for you to get your hair done. You owe me for these things. And then the owing them is like 3, 4, 5 times what the actual price for those things would actually be. So there's no actual way for this person to pay off all of the debts that they have acquired. Leaving is dangerous. Very dangerous. There are women who have been beaten so badly that they cannot see again, or have severe brain damage or loss of limb or life because they tried to leave. They're traffickers, if they are trafficking multiple women or individuals, they will use this as an example for the other individuals. This is what happens if you try to leave. And they don't really care if that harms or kills the victim. Like I mentioned, they don't leave because they don't think that they're a victim and they think that this is their fault or they deserve to be in this situation. They're already vulnerable individuals, so they're not coming at this with the healthiest mentality, because they just weren't in a situation that allowed for it. So some global statistics here. Globally, about 50% of human trafficking victims are used for sex acts. Then you get forced labor, and then some of the criminal activity like selling drugs. We also see them forced begging, forced marriages, some baby selling and organ removal, but that's not very common. And we have this other unknown because I'm sure there's stuff going on that we don't know about. So these are statistics for North America. You'll see here that the majority of trafficked individuals, 62%, are adult women. And next up, most trafficked would be young girls. So that's at 22%. Adult men are trafficked for sex. less commonly, but it happens at 13%. And in 2018, it was 3% for boys, young boys. I have been reading some other articles and some anecdotal stuff. It seems like the demand for young boys is increasing. So mostly sexual exploitation of adult women and then young girls. So this is a hotspot map. I believe Polaris was where I took this from. And the darker orange, almost red, is where more sex trafficking cases have been identified. So these are just ones that have been identified, not necessarily like possible, just identified. Many of these victims live nearby these hotspots and they're not necessarily trafficked great lengths. They may just go from, I don't know, our area to Chicago, or maybe they go from Chicago to Des Moines, something like that. They don't often go long distances. Lots of tourist areas have increases in sexual exploitation. Any area of high income. Naperville is actually a hot spot in Illinois because there's such economic prosperity in that area. And then additionally, if you have a lot of people coming from out of town for some reason, like a conference center, for instance, a lot of, and I just heard this, I was listening to another podcast today in Atlanta. They have a big conference area and there's a bunch of strip clubs around it. And if you go to the strip club, on everybody's windshield is a flyer that says contact this number to get an in-home massage or a personal lap dance or something of that nature. What it really is you're making a date for a prostitute to meet you at one of these surrounding hotels. So that's just like one little, microcosm of what that might look like. It is noteworthy that these hotspots tend to follow major highways, which is why Emily had pointed out we have I-39 and I-80, and we're not really that far from 55 either. They follow those because it's easy to transport people, as well as truckers and truck stops are a large group of individuals who are patrons. I guess I shouldn't even use patrons, buyers of these sexual exploitation. So these are just a few headlines from around our area. You'll see there's some guys up top there from McLean County who were arrested. I'm willing to bet this unknown girl who was 17 was actually a trafficking victim who they promoted to middle management. We've got some here in Peoria County, and you can see where he recruited. So he was actually working out of Peoria County. Yeah, he was working out of Peoria County, but, went to Champaign and other areas to recruit. I've got RubHub up on the upper right-hand corner of your screen here, where it says Grand Ridge Massage. Now, no police, no legal, nobody has come in and, done any investigations because they do have technically appropriate licensing, but you can purchase appropriate licensing. I highly suspect that this Grand Ridge Massage, this is an illicit massage center. It is also open till all hours in the morning. There are two other ones on there that aren't too far. We've got one in Morris here and one in Spring Valley. And then I'm sure you're familiar if you've lived in the area. I think it was called Lily's, which was a massage parlor that women were working as prostitutes out of for traffickers. And that did get closed down. And I just had the informant Nikki was used. That was the LaSalle County prostitution sting they were talking about. So some red flags to identify possible victims And I want you to remember that like one of these things does not equal a victim. And perhaps someone has all of these things and they are not. These are just potential identifiers. And of course, the more you stack on top of each other, the more likely they are being trafficked or are victims of trafficking. So one of the things is using terminology. And I've got some terminology at the end of the presentation we can go through if we still got some time. But they use some trafficking terminology. They may be in not amazing health. They're not going to be like falling down, but they're malnourished. Maybe they've got some untreated infections. They might have some injuries from physical violence, and just poor health in general, but not poor enough for them to not be able to work. Big one is wearing clothing that is not appropriate for the setting. So if it's 20 below and we have 8 inches of snow and you see a girl in high heels, a short skirt, no like leggings on, and like a tank top, something isn't right here. They might have expensive items, but not actually have any money to purchase those items. So they might have like the newest iPhone, but have no access to money. They may have some jewelry that's really expensive, but they have no access to money. Their traffickers have given those items to them. They have not purchased them of their own accord. Of course, they're going to be fearful of law enforcement. And the main reason is, well, one, they don't think that they're a victim. 2, law enforcement has, and this is changing, has had a history of arresting the prostitutes or prosecuting the prostitutes when they're actually the victims, because they're not willing to give up their traffickers. They still have that bond, that trauma bond that's been created, that sort of Stockholm syndrome going on, and they don't see their trafficker as the bad guy. They see them as part of the same thing. Lots and lots of branding or tattoos. So I've got some typical tattoos here. Daddy, the money sign, the barcode. Those are common ones. Here's some actual images. You can see the crown, and a couple of these girls here in both the right and the left-hand corner have king and then a name after them with the crown. That would be their trafficker or their pimp. You can use the term interchangeably. It's the exact same thing. Pimp equals trafficker. And then dollar signs. There's a great TED talk with a physician who had only recently had like a training or learning about human trafficking. And she's a surgeon, so she doesn't see the victim or the patient beforehand. She gets in, she's going to be doing some sort of surgery on her stomach, and she starts seeing dollar signs like all over this woman's body, on her neck, on her abdomen, in her groin area, on her bum, like all these places. And she's like, I think this victim's being trafficked. And that was strictly because of all those tattoos. I don't know, how that story went afterwards, but she was identified by healthcare. So I'm hoping that it went well for her from that point on. You see, I think there's some like chain links on one, not very common, but it's out there. And then the barcodes, and then people's names or even ID numbers as well. So some more of these red flags. You can, if you see the victim with their trafficker, the victim's it's very unlikely she's going to be speaking. She's going to let the trafficker speak for her. She may not have any personal possessions on her at all. She doesn't have access to her identification documents like we had talked about before. Sometimes if the girls are being moved around, and they will move girls from truck stop to truck stop, they're not sure what town they're in. They can't really tell you like what day it is, maybe not like what month it is. It really depends, but they don't have access to, they don't have a calendar. They're not going to a 9-to-5, and they're being moved around so much, and they're not being told where they're going. The girls will often have inconsistent stories if asked by law enforcement or healthcare providers, whomever, because they're trying to protect their trafficker, often is the case, or they are so traumatized or physically abused that their brain is not working correctly and they are not remembering things the way that they actually happened, or they'll remember it at this moment one way and then another way in the next moment. They'll also avoid eye contact. This is one of the things that I'll talk about in the terminology. Making eye contact with an individual is means to be physically beaten. You don't look at anyone in the eyes. They call it reckless eyeballing, looking someone in the eyes, and that can get you killed if you are a victim. So I'm not suggesting that any of you go out and ask these at point blank to a victim. If you are suspicious that someone may be being trafficked, I would say build a relationship to the best of your ability to establish trust, build a rapport with the person where you might be able to ask some of these questions or express your concern. Some of these questions might look like, is someone forcing you to engage in sexual activity against your will or labor against your will? Are you being paid for these sex acts and do you keep the money? Does someone else hold your identification documents? If you wanted to leave this life or this job, would you be able to? Where do you work, eat, and sleep? If it's in the same location, that's a pretty common thing when victims are being trafficked. That would be a hint that perhaps they're being trafficked. And then just, is someone else controlling who you talk to, where you go, what you wear, just controlling your life as a whole. And those would help to facilitate identifying a victim. Let me just make sure I'm not going too far over on time here. Okay, I'm doing all right. So this next part, recognize, respond, and refer. So I've talked about, all the signs. So you may be able to recognize a potential victim. We've talked about some questions you might be able to ask. When you, or if you were to approach this, be compassionate. Try to withhold judgment. Try to withhold shock if they're telling you something that seems particularly terrible. They don't want you to feel pain either. And if they see that on your face, they're gonna pull back. They're not gonna continue. It's really important that you start with saying, I care about you. I care about your safety, your health, and your future. And that's why I'm asking you these hard questions or having this difficult conversation. The next step would be then to refer them to someone who can help. You've done a great job. You've helped to get them to this place. You can call Safe Journeys and we can help. Again, 24/7, free, confidential. They very likely are not going to be like, yes, help me. It's usually not how it goes, but you can give them the information of who they can contact if they decide they want help. So that can be us. You can put it on a tiny little piece of paper, just the number, so she can shove it somewhere, in her bra or something where her trafficker may not see it. We tell healthcare professionals to have if the person has a cell phone, make up a fake name and put the number under that fake name. They also, the human trafficking hotline, or did I have it up here? Here it is. You can also text with the human trafficking hotline, or you can go to their website and they can do a live chat. So you can use any of those resources to share with the victim. Or even giving them your information and saying, hey, if you do want to reach out, or you do want to try and get out, contact me and then we can work together to access these resources. Some things I really want to mention. First of all, not all sex work is trafficking. a large portion of sex work is trafficking, but there are a handful of individuals who sell themselves or sell sex and retain the money and are their own bosses. And that's whatever, that's fine. But the large portion of sex work that's happening is done via trafficking. Again, victims don't identify as victims, tread lightly. The main goal for helping any potential victims is to reduce harm and support them, not for them to disclose that they're a victim. If they continuously say, like, no, I'm not the victim, I'm not being trafficked, or they're giving you, subtle hints that they don't think that's the case, don't push it. Help them in other ways. If they have a substance abuse problem, help get them into addiction therapy, whatever that looks like. If they are malnourished or they're having health problems, help them to access health care or nutritious food or childcare, stuff like that. Again, providing them with hotline numbers, human trafficking hotline or safe journeys. A lot of them are going to say do not call law enforcement if they do come forward, because law enforcement has historically arrested the prostitutes. Nothing's happening to the traffickers, partly because the women are not saying they're being trafficked or won't give up the trafficker's name. But law enforcement tends to be scary for them. Unless the victim specifically says, please call the police, don't call the police. If you see some things and you can't build a relationship with this individual, or you see, like, maybe at a motel, it really looks like there's guys coming and going from this hotel room all the time, you can actually call and report as a tip to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They log that information. I don't know exactly how many tips it takes before they get people like law enforcement involved, but they do keep that information and will contact some FBI, local police, task force, etc., if they have enough information to do so. So, bigger picture, not just thinking about individual victims. What can you do overall to help end or reduce human trafficking? One of the biggest things is decrease demand. Without the demand for purchasing sex or sex acts, it wouldn't exist. If there weren't people saying, I want to purchase a prostitute, there would be no prostitutes. So if we could eliminate demand, I know that's a big ask, then that would significantly impact human trafficking. Lots of different things that could decrease demand. I won't even get into them. That's a whole nother lecture. Do your research. I will put up a slide here, and I can also send Emily an email with a detailed list of different websites and organizations that you could look to find out more about human trafficking and what you could do. Donating. Money is always important. I'm not saying donating to Safe Journeys, donating to other human trafficking agency or organizations, even little things like other local nonprofits, any sort of social welfare that helps to lift people out of poverty will help to reduce human trafficking. Becoming an activist, yay, become an activist. This is my favorite part. Start a conversation with your friends, with your family, at work. Tell them, like, yes, human trafficking is happening here. Changing legal or legislative policies locally could even make a difference. If we said we're not going to arrest prostitutes anymore, when we pick up a prostitute, we're going to get them connected with victim services, or we're going to put them in this halfway house, things like that. Anything to increase primary prevention would be so helpful, not just with human trafficking, but with domestic violence, with sexual violence, with general violence, with bullying. tackling gender inequality and discrimination. If we could get rid of gender inequality and discrimination or oppression of any form, we would reduce violence as a whole in extraordinary numbers. Of course, like I said, decreasing the demand. If we can build communities and towns and cities where people have reliable access to food, to employment, to safe housing, to healthcare, to education, if we can reduce the things that make people vulnerable, then the traffickers have nobody to recruit. That's my big pitch. And I appreciate you all being so kind as to listen. I will send this out for you all to watch on your own, or I'll send it to Emily and she can email it to you guys if you want. It's a survivor story from Canada about a woman who was trafficked in the illicit massage parlor. So I wanted to just run through some quick terminology. The life or the game is what they call being a prostitute with the pimp. And maybe you have wives or wife-in-laws or sisters, cousins-in-laws. Those are usually other prostitutes that are working for the trafficker or pimp. The stable is used as a term to talk about all of the individuals that the trafficker is exploiting. Let's see. I talked about reckless eyeballing already. Grooming. Oh, a lot lizard. If you hear someone say lot lizard, that would be someone who has moved around from different truck stops as a prostitute. They just got all these different terms. It's wild. Here's some more resources. The Polaris Project is great. Shared Hope International is great. There's a podcast, there's a few podcasts, but there's one that has, I think, over 200 episodes, and they're really knowledgeable. It's called End Human Trafficking. Pretty simple. Walkfree.org. Here are some of the references that I used, which are also other options. The Center for the Prevention of Abuse is actually located in Peoria, and it is where our case manager for this half of the state is located for human trafficking victims. Polaris Project is amazing. HEAL at the bottom there is for healthcare professionals. And I think that is all that I have for you guys today. And I'd like to open it up for questions, if there are any. You can feel free to type them in the chat as well.
Yes, and if you're not comfortable, I will be happy to be your voice. I have no problem doing that for you if you do have any questions for Heather. And if you think of anything later, you can direct them to me and I can send them on to Heather. Or you can find her email also.
Yeah, you guys, I love talking about that, which is weird with this stuff, but I do. I'm passionate about it.
I was in Naperville when a human trafficking ring was broken up when I was in college, which was very eye-opening because I was only 19 or 20. At that time, Naperville had been voted the #1 safest city in the country 2 or 3 years in a row. I'm going
Unless you're a victim of human trafficking.
Right, yeah. Right. I was going to school with kids whose parents made millions and millions of dollars. So it wasn't something that was really on anyone's radar at the time. And knowing that it happened, and I was also a poli-sci major, so we talked about a lot of things like that. Yeah. So yeah, it was very interesting. Do you have an idea of what number, basically how many people in our area are being trafficked? We do have one question.
I don't have a local number. They don't. The way they collect this data is terrible, to be honest, because it's all these different places collecting data, so we can't get a great idea. But I can tell you that Illinois as a whole usually jumps around over the last decade between the 9th and 11th worst states for human trafficking. So we're about top 10 of the worst pretty much always.
Wow.
Chicago plays a huge role because we're a big major
Right.
city.
Right.
But the trafficking itself doesn't just happen in Chicago.
No.
I know that they actually, I want to say in November, we're going to have another report card, as they call it, coming out. So that will be interesting to see. I'm definitely on the email list for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good question, though. Sorry, I can't really answer
It's
it.
just, like you said, it's a statistic that's really hard to get a grasp on, especially if law enforcement is notified and responds in their typical way. Arresting a prostitute doesn't.
It is getting better. It really is getting better.
It is, but arresting the prostitute doesn't tell us how many people are being trafficked, and it doesn't stop the traffickers.
Nope.
At all.
They just bail out the victim, and then the victim's back on the street.
If they do that sometimes.
Yeah. And yeah. I try not to get on my soapbox.
Same. I am also trying really hard not to.
Yeah.
But does anyone else have any other questions for Heather before we part ways? What do you suggest about pass-through situations?
Could you elaborate on that a little more?
I don't want to assume, but I'm going to guess something like you see them in the Walmart parking lot, but they're clearly not going to be staying for long. Yeah, like so in this case, they saw someone that they believe is being trafficked, but
honestly,
who knows where they went?
There's not much that you can do. If it's just like I had this happen to me at Target actually the other day. I saw an individual who, for a variety of reasons, I looked at my husband and I was like, I think that person's being trafficked. I considered I stood there in the moment and I was like, what do I do? Do I call the police? No, that's not good. Oh, okay. At a gas station. Actually, that's a little bit easier than Target. I would let the gas station know, because then they're going to be looking out for something similar or this person or people again. And just say, just bring to their attention or their manager or their supervisor. You may even call later so that you can speak to a manager or supervisor. Gas stations are more and more often trained in human trafficking because they are so commonly seen. So I would say your best bet, unless you see a person being physically dragged across the floor, and you could, call the police then, but I would say inform the gas station.
That's an interesting. It makes sense, but I hadn't thought of it.
Yeah. I know it sucks. And it's especially when you see these things, you're like, okay, I pretty clearly can tell what's going on here, but I can't go up to this person and be like, hey, you're being trafficked. That's not going to work.
Right.
And may end up causing more harm to the
person. Especially if whoever's trafficking them is right there. It's gonna make it an even messier situation.
If you wanted to inform the police that you saw a sketchy situation, they're not going to send somebody out. So if you just wanted to say, I saw a thing, didn't feel good about it, just letting you know. You can also do that with the National Human Trafficking Hotline as well.
Oh, that's good to know. I hadn't known that.
Yeah. A lot of people think it's only for victims, but it's not. You see something that's a little weird, let them know. They're going to log it. And if they see this coming up over and over again, they're going to get somebody else involved.
One of my favorite podcasts also was advertising a website where you upload photos of your hotel rooms.
Yeah.
Can't remember it off the top of my head, but I will definitely.
It was an app, I think.
It might be an app now. At the time, it was early on in their days. It was probably not quite pre-apps, but close to. I will include it in my follow-up email. Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yeah. I don't remember the name of it.
I can't remember it off the top of my head either, but.
Because it's for those girls on webcams or taking the photo of themselves to put on the website. Right. So they can see then what this particular hotel room looks like in this particular location, because people just traveling have uploaded those photos.
Yeah, that happened. I found out about it as I was traveling for job interviews before I started working here, and now I have so many pictures of hotel rooms on my phone now. Just because I was like, that, you know, if there's anything we can do to help, I would like to.
Yeah. That's a good one. I'm so glad you brought that up. I had forgotten about it because I haven't been traveling.
Yeah.
COVID. So I haven't even bothered with it because I'm not going anywhere.
Right. Totally understandable. We do have one person who wants to know if you are open to the idea of doing an event in a movie theater to show some of these things, or somehow do more community awareness. I think this is our first step. I know I was really nervous to do this initially. It's not something that most people typically think happens in our area. And it's another one of those things where if or when you see it, you don't know what to do immediately. So the more we do this, Heather's going to be presenting again in October. It'll be in early afternoon, I think, or late morning.
11?
I can't recall.
11,
yes,
I think.
Late morning. Plus, this is being recorded and it will be on our YouTube channel. And, you know, so you can come back and watch it again. You can attend in October, because October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So we have to do whatever we can.
I am a busy bee in October.
I can imagine.
But yes, I would love, contact me. You can get my info from Emily, or she can pass on your info. This is my job, is going around and educating the community about different things. And human trafficking is one of those ones that is particularly close to my heart and that I'm especially passionate about. So you name it, I'll be there.
Perfect. Well, does anybody have any other questions for Heather or suggestions?
Yeah, I am open to suggestions always. Critiques, criticisms, concerns, love them. Give them to me.
All we have so far is thank yous. So thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you guys.
I hope that everyone will stay tuned for more library programs. We're back to doing at least our third Thursday programs, except ironically enough, in October, we're doing Heather on a Wednesday, I think it's a Wednesday morning. And then Chris, I can never say his last name correctly. He is a very popular author. We've partnered with a number of libraries in Illinois, and there will be a talk/chat with Chris Bolan, I think is how you pronounce his last name. I apologize to anyone who watches this video later for not pronouncing it correctly. He will be talking about his books and his latest one. And then in November, we're doing a History of Gangsters program. Yeah, so that'll be interesting. Gangsters of the Midwest.
I'll be there for that for sure.
That one will probably also be virtual. So I hope you all stay tuned. And again, if you guys know anyone who needs help, anyone who is a victim of domestic or sexual violence, just pass them Safe Journeys information. Heather and everyone at Safe Journeys is more than happy to help. That's what you're here for.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for coming tonight.
Thank you, and everyone have a great night.